This is what the end of an empire looks like. Not with the clash of an epic battle, but with creeping shackles of debt. Debt is inherently backward looking. It is paying off expenses already incurred. When a vibrant country should be looking into the future, this one is only looking into the past, paying off our past greatness. Joe, we are cresting over the top of the hill, picking up speed on the way down. On this episode of This American Debt, we are exploring the story of federal student debt. Given a break since COVID and now, having had to pay, are reverting back to pre-pandemic levels of default rates. And then, of course, even worse, the country itself was finally downgraded. Moody's. Because debt. My sister and I go backpacking a lot, and there's this saying in the backpacking community. It's called, you pack your fears. What do you think that means? You pack your fears.
You think about what could go wrong and try to pack things to prepare for it?
Yeah, kind of. You do it subconsciously. So, like, I'll give you an example to explain. My sister, she always packs way too much food. We'll be like packing beforehand, and we'll say out loud, like we're consciously, we know this. She'll say, I always pack way too much food. And then, so we'll try to think about packing less, but then she'll still pack more food. So the idea is you pack your fears. She's afraid of going hungry. That's just kind of the message there. For me, I typically pack too much like warm clothing, maybe bring too much water, and, you know, you pack your fears. I'm afraid of exposure and you know, thirst.
Dehydration.
Which, yeah, frankly, to me, that makes more sense. Because those are the things that are going to kill you fastest,
Yeah.
Especially like in the White Mountains in the fall when it's like really
You
cold.
can go weeks without food.
You can go a long time without food. So, you know,
Water.
But that's what it
Not that
means.
long.
You pack your fears. And I think similarly to that, I was thinking earlier, I think you spend your anxieties. And what I mean by that is kind of another example. You know, recently we got our tax refund. We probably got a pretty good one this year. And my wife and I were trying to decide what to spend it on. And we decided to split it, you know, as a happy married couple does. They come to a compromise and we split it. And on my half, I paid down, I took the whole thing and I put it into the car. So just paying down the auto debt because it's expensive. And I generally just hate debt. It just
Where's
makes
the fun
me,
in that, though?
I know, but it makes me anxious, right? It just makes me feel better. And that's kind of what I mean. Is like you spend your anxieties. On her side, she put it into redoing one of the bedrooms.
Yeah,
And,
so, you know, get something tangible.
Right. And you know, for her part, and we've talked about this, like the fact that there are like cracks and stuff in the ceiling, it makes her anxious. Like she doesn't like it. It like bothers her. So
Interesting.
you spend your anxieties. And if some people might say, I want to go traveling. Well, it's like, well, you're probably anxious about not, you know, about having kind of your life sort of flutter away and not getting to experience things as much as you really would like to. And I think you're really driven a lot by anxiety. I think anxiety shapes your personality a lot more than people give it credit for. But what do you, if you had 10,000 just to spend anywhere you want, paying down debt, whatever you want to do, what would you do?
Without thinking too hard about it, I'd probably buy Bitcoin.
You're missing out, man. That's what you're worried about.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
No, I mean, I wasn't thinking about it that way, how you framed it, but that is a real answer. I probably would just go do something like buy Bitcoin.
Yeah.
You know, because I don't know, I'm in a pretty good position overall, so I'm not like dying to buy this thing or that thing, or I don't know. So, but like you said, your anxiety, why would I buy Bitcoin? I believe in it for the future. It's definitely going to the moon. It's already, you know, a little bit of the way there. It's got way further to go.
And you're missing out.
Yeah, fear. Well, I mean, I guess it is the good old classic millennial FOMO happening, but it's also, it's like, you know, I want to get rich. I want to get rich so I can just do whatever I want.
Yeah, right.
No,
Don't
but I
know.
mean, seriously, though, like if I were to do that, and then if it did increase in value, then I would have more freedom. I think would be the line of reasoning, kind of like what you were touching on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's a good transition just to debt. So that just generally makes me anxious. Debt makes me anxious. And that's, it's not a secret to those who watch this program that I was a one issue voter when kind of this previous election. All I cared about was whoever could promise to pay down the debt. It drives me nuts. It's the reason why I kind of do this podcast. We focus on what we do. So this episode is about debt, and it's about the Moody's downgrade because of debt. And I also wanted to make a quick note at the end about the student debt. So first off, before we even get into it, so Ray Dalio certainly agrees with me on debt. He's got a book coming out like next week or something. I think it's literally the beginning of June. Today is May 22nd, 2025. And his book's called How Countries Go Broke. So I think that's pretty good timing, considering that Moody's was the last of the rating agencies to downgrade the U.S. debt. I'm gonna have to read it, although I'm gonna not enjoy it because, like I said, this topic sort of makes me anxious. At the same time, it's just kind of something. I don't know, man. It's like important. I gotta look into this. I think with eyes open.
Yeah, definitely. You're a really big Dalio fan.
Yeah, he's come up a lot recently.
When did you get that sponsorship deal going?
Well, I'm hoping to get one, right? Let's talk about the Moody's thing. The market took it kind of in stride, didn't really go anywhere. And that's probably mainly because Moody's is the last of the three main rating agencies to downgrade the US debt. So this is kind of old news. S&P did it in 2011. So this was on the back. They cited political dysfunction, particularly around the debt ceiling negotiations, the growing debt burden they cited, and then fiscal challenges. Now that was over, almost 15 years ago. Fitch downgraded the U.S. in August 1st, 2023. So, we can look at their press release. They called into focus the fiscal deterioration, the growing deficit expected to rise from, they said 3.7% to 6.3% in 2023, the high and growing debt burden, erosion of governance. So what they were citing there was the repeated debt ceiling standoffs and kind of the last minute resolutions. And then Moody's kind of finally got on board. And that's what we're going to talk about today. All right. God, I can't stand Moody's. Oh, God. All right. So this is the press release. We obviously don't have the whole study. You got to pay, I guess, top dollar for that. Moody's like, oh man. One of the things in my mind that they're known for is this price discrimination. Just they slice and dice all of their products to fine little grain things. They try to sell you one bit and they sort of show you all the things that you don't have access to. It drives me fucking crazy.
I mean, that's their business.
That's their business.
Yeah, and I think, ratings agencies aren't really seen as the go-to place to learn everything about these things, and there might be a reason for that.
What do you mean?
To make it difficult to access.
Yeah.
A lot of times, decision making feels a little bit subjective.
Yeah.
You can always give 20 reasons why, but people criticize them a lot over the financial crisis. They were quote unquote selling out in some cases. Just not a stellar reputation, all in all.
I'm kind of glad to see that other people feel that way. I don't really like them. And kind of the few products that I've run into throughout my, finance and market research career, just not a fan. But regardless, they are important. So, and people do take their credit ratings seriously. So, this is the press release. So, like kind of the intro, the ratings rationale, and then we're not going to look into the stable outlook and kind of some of these summary stuff. But I put it into a format a little more palatable. So let's look at this. So they write this 1-notch downgrade or 21-notch rating scale reflects the increase over more than a decade in government debt and interest payment ratios to level that are significantly higher than similarly rated sovereigns. Let's look at some other sovereigns. So we got like Belgium, the UK, Austria. The Belgium interest payment to revenue was 3.2% in 2022. The UK was 9%. The world on average is 5.2%. Austria is 2.6%. And where do you think the US is? That's interest payments divided by revenue.
Isn't it like 25%, I would think?
I think that's what it is now. The last data that we have is was 18, and that was in 2023.
It sounds pretty bad.
It's
compared to, like you were just saying, Belgium, Austria, UK.
Yeah, it's bad. And I think actually even in the Moody's press release, they cited 18 for 2024, but I think they made a mistake because Moody's so dumb. So dumb.
Tell me how you really feel, Luke.
They point to that. And okay, agreed. They go ahead and they crap on, the U.S. administration and Congress. But let's focus on this one. Over the next decade, we expect larger deficits as entitlement spending rises, while government revenue remains broadly flat. In turn, persistent large fiscal deficits will drive the government's debt and interest burden higher. So I got to say, this sounded really familiar to something that we sort of already covered in episode 30 in fantastic depth. I think that episode got all of 20 views, and I'm tempted to cover it again, but we'll just provide a link. Honestly, I think the reason why it failed was the title. It was too clickbaity. I was sort of, I was experimenting a little bit. I wanted to go clickbaity. I was like, oh man, this is going to work. It was called Social Security Ponzi Scheme. Nay, it's worse. And I think our potential audience would be turned off by clickbaity crap. Anyway, lesson learned. But I did want to revisit it. So, what did they just say a moment ago? So they said, over the next decade, we expect larger deficits as entitlement spending rises. Government revenue remains broadly flat. Large fiscal deficits. So they might as well just be describing this graph, which we've seen before. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. But just to run through it, this is the percent of GDP. This black line is the total receipts. Think of it, revenue. So they're kind of running around this, a little bit shy of the 20% mark. And then all this stuff is the various spending components. The main ones, defense, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. And then this monster right here is interest. Okay. This is 2024. And we got the historical and the projected. So they're just looking at this and they're like, this is not a AAA. This is not a AAA looking chart right here.
Can't argue with that.
But they also focused on entitlement spending. And if you recall from that last episode, that was the one when we we were able to say a quarter of a quadrillion. We were talking about like the total liabilities of Social Security over the next, I think it was 75 years. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Social Security is set to, run out. We got kind of like a buffer. We got a trust fund that is going to be able to cover shortfalls. So like when expenses exceed revenues, you can still cover the shortfall and obligations with that trust fund. But that trust fund, according to this, is set to essentially run out of steam at the beginning of the 2030s. So again, they're talking about entitlements, and we were yelling and screaming over in that episode that, yeah, it's a big problem. And that's what this graph. So watch that episode if you want. And just here's like another one. Look at this. You can't, like, Moody's looks at this and is like, how could we seriously call it a AAA? This is the government saying this. All right. Let's keep going. So then they write, the stable outlook reflects balanced risks at AA1. So after trashing the U.S., they're going to give it some positives here. So the U.S. retains exceptional credit strengths such as the size, resilience, and dynamism of its economy, and the role of the U.S. dollar as a global reserve currency. In addition, while recent months have been categorized by a degree of policy uncertainty, so we know all about that, right? We're talking about what's going on with the tariffs. we expect that the U.S. will continue its long history of very effective monetary policy led by an independent Federal Reserve. So a couple things going on. They're giving a big tip of the hat to the Federal Reserve and highlighting that it is independent, which sort of we also think is very important. And we talked about recently how that Trump's comments saying like, "Oh, if I wanted him fired, he'd be out of there," kind of deal, and then he walked that back. So they look at other institutional features, separation of powers, 3 branches of government, give a nod to policy effectiveness, relatively insensitive to events over a short period. I'm going to kind of add this comment: while these institutional arrangements can be tested at times, we expect them to remain strong and resilient. So I guess this is the talk of, do you want to say the F word? Maybe we'll save it. So that's all fine and good, but I think this is a good way just to look at the Moody's rating methodology. So they do have a framework, and this is kind of interesting. And these are sort of the broad pillars, or what they call factors. There are 4 factors: the economic strength, institution and governance strength, fiscal, and susceptibility to event risk. And let's zoom down a little bit further. So again, these are the factors, and then we have the sub-factors. So the economic strength, so growth, scale, they sort of touched upon these, size, dynamism. It's a tough word to say. Am I saying it right?
Dynamism.
Dynamism?
What?
You say it out loud and then you think it's wrong. Whatever. Then they also gave a tip of the hat to the institutions, kind of in those few paragraphs. Talked about the quality. They talked about the monetary and macroeconomic policy effectiveness. Really, what's holding it back? It's all in this fiscal strength. It's all the debt burden and the debt affordability. And one thing that I think we'll see later that they'll call out is the interest payments to revenue. Like this one in particular, just getting crushed. Like the U.S. here is getting destroyed. Interest payments to GDP is basically the same metric. The general government, the debt to GDP touched upon, and then the debt to revenue.
Yeah, really, really no doubt about it. It's really in kind of a scary spot. And before COVID, we had like a good decade or so with interest rates near zero. And the longer term interest rates were low, but front end interest rates that the Fed controls, it was held at zero. So like treasury bills, the government was funding like trillions of dollars at literally no cost for years. So we had that going on, and now all of a sudden it was kind of forcefully taken away from us whenever we saw inflation come up. So we're stuck in this really vicious cycle right now, which is interesting to like look at this chart, because obviously they're just like drawing a straight line out there. And I think the reality is you're not going to make it to 2090 doing the exact same thing. Like something is going to have to break along the way, and I'm sure it'll be a large historic event, but no one knows what's going to precipitate that, how it's going to come about, how we're going to respond to it, what are the impacts going to be on.
It's brutal. And you imagine
reserve
Doge
currency status. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought about zooming in on the reserve currency stuff. That could be like its whole episode in and of itself, because you always hear that. Yeah. You always, how much of an advantage it is to be the world's reserve currency, but the mechanism by which that is such a huge advantage, it was still kind of a little bit of a mystery to me. Anyway, that should be a future episode. But like you look at this and you think, how much did Doge impact this? I think they came around and there was like 200 billion or something that they saved. It doesn't
like
even
160 or something.
It doesn't even show up on this.
It's nothing. And that's kind of a big disappointment, by the way.
Right? That was kind of a disappointment to me. Like I was seeing that clock and it was like, 100 billion, 200 billion, and they were still going. We're going to get to 2 trillion. And then it got to like 150. They made a big announcement. Thank you so much, Elon. And then they're still working on it, I guess. But
I think the reality is, unfortunately, he was just forced out, not by anyone. I think just all these factors at play.
Tesla. I heard that Tesla was really struggling.
Yeah, and he was dealt a pretty big blow with that Wisconsin election. He basically deployed the same campaigning framework that he did for Trump, which was very successful in Pennsylvania, and then he tried to do it again, and he lost fabulously. So he's public opinion against him, his political strategy, was not as rock solid maybe as he thought. And it just takes a lot of time. He's doing really ambitious things in government, and you really can't do that part-time. I think it's good for him, though. I think he's definitely in a better spot to get back to Tesla and SpaceX. Politics isn't really his thing.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't know that. Anyway, let's just get to the end of sort of the ratings rationale. Yada, 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 you can read this. One of the things they zoomed in, without adjustments to taxation and spending, we expect budget flexibility to remain limited. Agreed. Okay. Mandatory spending is going to go up. But then they also say if the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is extended, it will add around $4 trillion to the federal fiscal primary deficit over the next decade. That's always interesting. I really wish I knew where they came with that number and how that works.
Mm-hmm.
Because
latest I saw, it's like very, very roughly speaking, because this week in the news a lot has been the evolving bill that I think just earlier today they finally got through the House by one vote.
Yeah.
They just do a yearly thing, and it comes out to kind of finger in the air a few billion per year, a few hundred billion per year. So it kind of fluctuates 300 to 500 billion every year. People make these estimates, and it's kind of flat every year. So yeah, it's you kind of measure a year and you just draw a straight line upward. So how useful is that? So in that sense, I never really like whenever people use that 10-year metric, because these things are continuously adjusted. It's like as if no elections are going to happen in the meantime. Those are like in the US, that's a huge factor to fiscal decisions within Congress.
But here's kind of the other thing I wanted to zoom in on. As a result, we expect federal deficits to widen, reaching nearly 9% of GDP by 2035, up from 6.4% in 2024. So this is, of course, a slap in the face to Scott Bessent and his whole 333 plan, right? So if you remember...
Seems worlds away now.
Yeah. Fair point. I mean, Moody's basically saying that we don't believe it. Scott Bessent is not going to deliver the goods. And recall, Bessent's 333 plan was 3% deficit. Moody's thinks it's going to be 3%. He said, by 2028. So, if you wanted to split hairs, you could say, oh, maybe he will make it, but by 2035, whatever. But then he also said 3% GDP growth. And then the other one was 3%, 3 million more barrels a day of oil. Remember that? Mm-hmm. This is, I wanted to call this out because Chamath, again, our audience, shout out to the all-in crowd. Chamath got it pretty wrong, I thought, on the pod. He said that it was 3% inflation. I think he was just closing his eyes, took a big swing, just guessing. That was an uncharacteristically large miss, I thought, by Chamath. Unless, of course, caveat, he literally sat down with Bessent. So maybe they maybe Bessent said that.
Bessent's never said anything like that.
Not publicly. Have you talked to Scott Bessent? Because Chamath has. But then again, 3% inflation doesn't make any sense.
They do a monetary policy review. They basically conceptually audit themselves.
Right. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's everything the Fed has been doing since 2008 has been totally uncharted territory. So it is something that you really have to do. There is no clear answer. They chose this regime where they were going to choose an inflation rate and be very explicit about it. That was one of the main things that Ben Bernanke brought starting in 2006. He made a very concerted effort to say, here's what we're targeting. Here's our forward guidance. Here's our dot plot. So it's kind of a good thing. So I always think it's funny when people say audit the Fed. It's like, well, they publish their balance sheet weekly. So you can go take a look whenever you want at the individual security level. Anyway, I don't want to derail us.
Go ahead. Let it out, Joe. It's healthy. It's healthy.
I like Ron Paul, but just he's a little too tough on the Fed.
Yeah, well, we are a little biased. Again, we both worked there. That's where we met. We met at the Fed. I was in supervision and you were in markets. You remember that? They said it would never work out, but look at us. Yeah, supervision.
Look at us now.
Supervision folks and markets folks don't mix a whole lot. So the other one I wanted to say, this one. So the federal interest payments are likely to absorb around 30% of revenue by 2035, up from about 18% in 2024. So they end that segment. While we recognize the U.S.'s significant economic and financial strengths, we believe these no longer fully counterbalance the decline in fiscal metrics.
I was hating on the rage earlier. I was hating on the ratings agencies a little bit, but it's really tough to argue with that last line there.
I mean, look, I get it. Okay, I don't disagree with them. I'm surprised it's been that high as long as it has. I mean, when it just breaks my heart, man. There's really no reason, no good reason it should be like this. But I really, again, kind of thread that's been through the last few episodes is just the Dalio thing. I think debt is what ends empires, and this is what it looks like.
And it's a spending problem, and you can pick at line items in the budget, but Social Security and those entitlements programs, it's just such a huge piece that just no one can touch. Like something like COVID, you had a huge influx of new entitlements. Now, they weren't made permanent, obviously, but they were probably around for longer than they needed to be.
So kind of the last bit of debt news that I wanted to get on had to do with this, the student loan debt. So let's look at this. This was recently published, also by the New York Fed, looking at the percent of balance that are 90 plus days delinquent. And this is this now red one. We got the student loan right here, this red one. It went. Oh, it's coming back, baby. It put a smile on my face because it means that students have to pay their stuff back. It's not a nice thing, but it does make me a little happy to see this, that, students have to pay their loans back. Okay.
I don't think that's a controversial statement to make.
It feels kind of like
the idea of getting a student loan and feeling that it should be wiped for who knows what reason.
Yeah,
but that kind of thinking is what structures the country into the situation that we're in now.
Yeah. So
I guess spend it, and it doesn't really matter.
I'm not happy that people are going delinquent in their student loans, but I am happy that people are kind of getting forced to pay it back. Let's put it that way. The other thing on this graph I'll just mention quickly: credit card delinquencies. We don't like to see that. That usually signals sort of a recession or something. That's not fun to see. Other also kind of creeping up.
Yeah, I mean, the blue one's credit card debt. It looks like that is not a leading indicator, but after the recession happens, it bumps up.
What's going on over here? Don't like to see it.
It's a good question.
I think we've kind of finally put the whole student loan, we're going to pay it off for you, to rest. So if you recall, actually, I think the pause in payments happened under Trump. Right. So that was when COVID first came around and people were going through tough times. But then they were continuously extended under the Biden administration. And Biden eventually said, we're just going to cancel $400 billion worth of debt. But it got hung up in the Supreme Court. The majority wrote about the major questions doctrine. So basically decided that only Congress had the authorization for executive actions with significant economic or political impact. And so I guess the other side was sort of arguing that the heroes
does that apply to tariffs.
if there's an emergency, Joe.
That's right.
So so anyway, the other side was arguing the HEROES Act would allow the president to quote unquote waive or modify loan terms, but that waive or modify loan terms doesn't mean you can cancel it. So they had to pay it back. And I guess one thing I'll mention is I think the Biden administration successfully canceled like 180 something billion of loans, but those loans were kind of more closely tied with people who are working already in government. So there are like some things you can forgive student loans
programs were already in place.
They were already in place
beforehand.
Right. And so they successfully canceled that debt, but the 400 billion number that was reversed.
It was like dribs and drabs, though. It was like small amounts here and there, I think.
But regardless, sort of what happened was you had to resume payments, but then they gave you like a year-long on-ramp. And then I think, they had to start paying it back in the previous, after October, I think. But then the data only flowed through in terms of delinquencies for remember 90 days, right? So you kind of have a quarter that you don't pay.
Mm-hmm.
And then that finally flowed through, and then it's been published finally in Q1 of 2025, even though that they started having to repay back in October.
Yeah, because current levels are, well, I guess that most recent one, what is that, like 5.7 billion?
So what this is kind of interesting. These are monthly deposits at Treasury.
Mm-hmm.
So this is students paying it back. I mean, that's a good, source of income, right? What am I saying? Who wouldn't want, upwards of 6 billion a month?
Deposit, but what is a deposit at Treasury?
So these are the monthly deposits for the education department at the U.S. Treasury. So
okay, for the education department.
These are predominantly student loan payments.
Got it.
So every month,
this
sense. Is what's coming in. And sort of stopped here, right? So the government was not receiving this money. And then afterwards, they had to, Supreme Court decision came and boom, people already just started paying them back before even they had to resume payments.
Which is kind of interesting too, though, because you obviously had that discrete fall downward in the beginning of 2020, but then even halfway through 2022, you fell even less than half the amount.
That's the forgiveness policy announced, and people were just like, "Yep,
just not doing it." But even a few months before that, you've got that, what was that sharp drop? Anyway,
dude, I don't know, man.
It's strange. Save
it for your episode, Joe. Asking me all these questions. Yeah. So anyway, I'll tell you, I think I did some reflection on this as to why this upset me so much, and this being they just canceled a bunch of student debt. So for my own story is I refinanced a long time ago, back in 2018 or 2019 or something. So they were private student loans. They were no longer federal student loans. So I was out of the running for this whole talk about canceling all the student debt. But when they made that announcement, man, I was upset. And I was doing some reflecting as to why I got so upset about that. And I think a lot of it has to do with, it was both the right decision to refinance, and it was also a bad decision. And I think that's what made me upset. I felt like I was being punished for doing the responsible thing. I mean, I took on this debt and I had every intention of paying it back. I think that's the right thing. That is the right attitude. But it was also a bad decision, because now this comes around and says, oh, now we can just cancel it for you. And so when you're not incentivizing the proper behavior, that's when you get into this right decision, bad decision problem. Mm-hmm. I'm Luke.
I'm Joe.
See you next time.
Next time.
Thanks.